I'm Tracy Pierce. That's Erin is one of our employees, and she's here today to talk about CHS, something that she's learning about and battling. She's been with us for over 2 years. Great employee. We're happy to have her, and she shows up to Rotary every week so that I can sleep in.
Okay. Like Tracy said, I'm Erin, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about my story. All over body pain and non-stop hospital ER visits. Back in 2015, 2016, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And after being diagnosed with fibromyalgia and failing on multiple treatments and medications, I was prescribed medical marijuana back in October of 2019 to treat my fibromyalgia. And honestly, that was the miracle drug for me. That really let me lead a normal life again. I was able to start working again and functioning like a normal person. I wasn't suffering from pain anymore. And everything was going pretty well until I started having some stomach issues in 2021-22. They were on and off. And then in September of 2023, I started vomiting nonstop every time I ate food. And I ended up losing 67 pounds in 4 months. I became extremely malnourished and severely dehydrated, and eventually my kidneys started shutting down. They were feeding me through an IV, and I was in and out of several different hospitals and ERs. I had every test possible done and even went to the Mayo Clinic for 2 months. And no one could figure out what was wrong with me. So what was wrong with me? After almost an entire year of horrible suffering, of being unable to function on a daily basis, I missed a lot of work. My husband missed a lot of work, being home taking care of me, of knowing that I was slowly dying. I had repeated hospitalizations, but all of my tests were coming back normal. 71 days ago, I was in my gastroenterologist's office discussing the next step of getting a feeding tube placed in when he asked me if I was still using my medical marijuana. I told him that I was and that I had been for the last 4.5 years for my fibromyalgia. And I asked him why he asked me that. He looked up at me at that point with wide open eyes and he said, "I know what you have. It's called CHS. He explained to me that he's been seeing it more and more often, at least 4 cases every 3rd shift when he rounds at the hospital every other week. So what is CHS? CHS stands for Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome. It is an agonizing but easily curable condition that affects some cannabis users. In layman's terms, CHS is like having a severe allergy to marijuana. First reported in the medical literature back in 2004, CHS is becoming more and more prevalent as the use of cannabis becomes more common, despite its low awareness among physicians and the public in general. Because marijuana is still illegal federally, funding and research are extremely limited at this time. Patients with CHS typically undergo extensive and expensive testing, including invasive procedures, before a diagnosis of CHS is ever made. It can take 1 to 2 years before the diagnosis is made, as the diagnosis is clinical and lacks formal diagnostic criteria. Unfortunately, many patients who are diagnosed with CHS are resistant to the idea that this is the actual cause of their symptoms. In patients who are hesitant to admit to marijuana use, diagnosis is often even further delayed. When I went to one of the first ERs, someone had briefly mentioned something about stopping my medicinal marijuana to see if that would help. And they asked me if taking hot showers helped my symptoms. But hot showers have always made me nauseous. And my husband and I just assumed at the time that the doctor was just against marijuana use, since he never explained why he said it or what he was talking about. And he never put anything in my after visit summary notes so that we could look into it, or we would have had a solution a long time ago. Thankfully though, 71 days ago, when I met with my gastroenterologist, I went home and researched the diagnosis online, and I had no hesitation afterwards. I realized that's exactly what I had, and so today I am 71 days sober. CHS causes some people who use marijuana frequently to get symptoms, but others don't seem to get them. Researchers aren't exactly sure why this happens, but research studies show that genetics might play a role. Another factor for the increase in CHS cases is the increase in the amount of THC in the marijuana being used today. The amount of THC in the marijuana that your parents may have smoked was usually under 20%, while the levels of THC in today's marijuana, especially medicinal marijuana, is up to 90 to 100%. Marijuana contains a lot of active chemical compounds called cannabinoids. When you use marijuana, these compounds bind to cannabinoid receptors found in your brain, digestive tract, and certain cells in your body. THC and CBD are the main cannabinoids in marijuana products. When you use marijuana frequently or use marijuana with high levels of THC, it can start to slowly change how the receptors in your body respond to the cannabinoid chemicals. This may lead to the CHS symptoms. For example, the drugs affect the receptors in the esophageal sphincter, which is the tight band of muscle that opens and closes to let food go from your throat to your stomach. If this flap doesn't work properly, your stomach acids might flow upward and cause you to have nausea and vomiting. And while marijuana seems to bring on nausea and vomiting in the stomach, it usually has the opposite effect on the brain, and that's why it's often used to treat nausea in cancer patients. So what are the signs and symptoms of CHS? In most majority of cases, one of the telltale signs is the nonstop episodes of vomiting, specifically after eating. Also severe nausea, stomach pain, severe dehydration, loss of appetite, and the strangest one, but one of the most noticeable ones, is relief from hot showers. THC affects the thermodynamics of the hypothalamus and the TRPV1 receptor in the brain, which is why the hot showers and capsaicin cream seem to bring relief to a majority of CHS sufferers, because they also trigger these receptors in the brain. So oftentimes when you go to the emergency room, one of the things the doctors will ask is if you use marijuana, and number two, if hot showers bring you relief from your symptoms. If they do, that's how they know that you have CHS. Unfortunately for me, the hot showers never brought me relief because hot showers have always made me nauseous. In some instances, you can also have weight loss, diarrhea, dizziness, headaches, elevated heart rate, and muscle weakness. Now I'm going to talk to you about trigger foods. This is a list of foods that can trigger an episode for most, but not all people. Most of these foods contain cannabinoids and should be avoided for the first 90 days to 1 year of recovery. Some of these major food triggers include caffeine, alcohol, cacao or chocolate, flax seeds, black and white pepper, truffle, kava, and rosemary. Some of the lesser food triggers include lavender, basil, oregano, cloves, cinnamon, carrots, turmeric, omega-3s, cabbage, broccoli, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, collard greens, kohlrabi, cayenne, mango, ginseng, and lemon balm. You want to make sure to read ingredients lists when you're eating out, cooking, or taking supplements. And when you go out to eat, you will most likely be consuming some sort of trigger food. Also, be sure to look for foods that are high in omega-3s. I have definitely had some episodes due to trigger foods since I've stopped using marijuana, and these are not as bad episodes as when you're using marijuana, but they do trigger the nausea and vomiting, as does the marijuana use. Now we'll talk about how to treat CHS. There is, unfortunately, only one cure for CHS. You must stop using all cannabis products and anything containing cannabinoids permanently. This means forever. You can't inhale it, get it on your skin, ingest it, or get it secondhand in any form, or you will start having episodes again. And to get through an episode, the ER may treat you with intravenous IV fluids if you're dehydrated, antiemetic medicines to help reduce vomiting, proton pump inhibitors for stomach inflammation, and Ativan or haloperidol for anxiety and pain awareness. One 2018 study found that 32.9% of self-reported frequent marijuana users who'd gone to the emergency room had symptoms of CHS. And a 2022 Canadian study found that ER visits for CHS-related problems had increased 13-fold between 2014 and 2021. With legislation or legalization occurring more and more frequently across the states, I can't even imagine what it is now. The worst part is, most doctors have never even heard of CHS. And because your test results come back normal for the most part, all they do is treat you for dehydration and send you on your way. Some even treat you like a drug seeker or want to put you on a psych hold. I know this because I had doctors treat me both like a drug seeker and want to put me on a psych hold because they thought I was either bulimic or crazy. The saddest part is you start to feel like you're going crazy because no one can find anything wrong with you. Next, we'll talk about the complications and risks associated with CHS. The ones I've highlighted are the ones that I struggled with. CHS causes you to vomit a lot, which can lead to severe dehydration and or issues with your electrolytes. If you don't get medical help, you might be at risk for other complications that dehydration can cause, including seizures, shock, kidney failure, muscle spasms or weakness, heart rhythm problems, and in very rare cases, brain swelling or cerebral edema. Some of these can lead to death. As a matter of fact, there have been numerous deaths linked to CHS. How many people ever thought that marijuana could kill you? If you would have told me a year ago that you could die from marijuana, honestly, I probably would have laughed in your face. So far, at least 16 deaths have been documented, but how many have been unknown or unreported? Besides dehydration, frequent vomiting can also cause complications like inflammation in your esophagus, also known as esophagitis, severe malnutrition, which is not getting proper nutrition, tears in your esophagus, tooth decay, low potassium, low levels of phosphorus in the blood, air trapped in the chest cavity between the lungs, or even aspiration pneumonia, which is breathing vomit into your lungs or airway. Now I have a video to show you on the dangers of cannabis, talking about a CHS death.
People don't understand what's going on with them. Most of the time, doctors aren't explaining the medicine that they're giving to them. And so all of a sudden, someone's going through like this feeling of psychosis in the emergency room, and they don't know why. So really, the only thing is like for me, like to stop using it with an IV or an have placement, and that would be it.
Yeah, so now this brings up a great point.
We've always been told that marijuana was one of the arguments was not, or that it makes you feel. Cannabis only does good. It does good because that's what everyone in the industry wants to think.
I think it's a mistake to say that anything is a cure. That anything is an atmosphere. If we drink too much water, you can die from it. Everything in excess can be bad for you.
When you hear about clean air, clean air is you. But is that clean air?
Yes.
Yes. There was a clean air one, we wouldn't have CHS. There was for CHS, it might be. Brian Smith Jr. died when he was 17 from CHS, Cannabinoid Hyperemesis syndrome. His mother Regina lives in Indianapolis, and I traveled to visit her to hear about Brian's story. I want Brian to be remembered for the person he was. He wasn't just the boy who died from CHS. He was my son. I know that this is yours, and that you have a lot of photos and memories. Brian, for you, what's so photos like this up in your house? It just makes me feel like he's here. Feel closer to him, and I like looking at all the memories because there's so many. Brian was the best kid. He was the lover. He took care of everyone. From what I was told, it was that he started smoking. I first noticed that Brian was sick. It was around April 7th. He called me and said, "Mom, I've been throwing up for a couple days and I can't stop." We were on our way to the emergency room. I think I stopped at the emergency room. And I'm telling these people that help me feel. They found that he was really dehydrated. So dehydrated that his kidneys had started to shut down. His liver was failing. The doctor asked me if he had any drugs. And I don't, you gotta be honest. So he told him that, yes, he smokes marijuana. And she said, I shower, I will help you. And we kind of looked at each other like, whoa. She said, you have CHS. I'm like, and she said, Cannabinoid Hyperemesis syndrome. And it's caused from smoking marijuana.
So if you ask a patient, do you smoke marijuana? Yes. Do you take hot showers? That make it better. And if they have this, their eyes will light up and go, hey doc, you know what I have. You must know what I have.
I sat down with Dr. Joseph Bush, who conducted one of the leading studies on CHS and told us
renal failure.
So he was admitted to the hospital to monitor his kidney functions. They gradually improved enough that he was released. The doctors told us to not smoke.
The doctors recommended that Brian abstain from consuming cannabis, and he agreed to do so for 45 days. After that, he began to smoke again and did not experience major symptoms for 6 months, but that would soon change.
October 23rd, I had woken up and Brian was sitting on the couch holding his stomach. And I said, Bub, are you okay? He started vomiting, so I called his doctor. And I said, I feel like I'm watching my son slowly die. My son had lost so much weight, you could see every bone in his body. And he started grabbing his back. And he said, my back hurts. And instantly I thought, his kidneys. So I called 911. Brian was laying on his side, facing the doorway. And he said, Mom, I can't breathe. So I roll him over. And my son's eyes are open. And my son's not breathing. So I start doing CPR. I looked him in the eyes. And I knew he was gone. I knew. I could see. The paramedic came in there. And she said, it's not looking good. I said, please keep trying. Please. Just a little longer, please. That's my baby, just please. One of the paramedics broke down and he didn't have to tell me. I just needed to miss the face. And he said, I'm sorry.
It's a heartbreaking story, and I feel so much for Brian and Regina and their whole family. I can't imagine that kind of loss. Renal failure can lead to other problems and eventually to death.
Brian's autopsy did not come back for 5 months. So I opened it up and it said dehydration due to CHS. And I cried because I have an answer now. I have something to fight for.
If you think you've been experiencing symptoms of CHS, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain that get better with hot showers, and you're someone who regularly consumes cannabis, see this as a warning sign.
Every human body has an endocannabinoid system, which consists of a network of endocannabinoid receptors that are distributed throughout the body. It supports functions like memory, digestion, motor function, immune response, and more. The TRPV1 receptor is a specific receptor found in the skin and in some organs. It's turned on by cannabis, hot showers, and hot pepper. For patients with CHS, hot showers and hot peppers or capsaicin can help reduce symptoms.
So this receptor is somehow important in this disease. We know that because the hot showers, 109 degrees Fahrenheit or higher temperature, turn on this receptor. And if you ask these patients, they're not taking warm showers, they're taking very hot showers. And also, capsaicin cream is known to turn on the TRPV1 receptor. There's different types of receptors, right? There's some that are pleasure receptors. This one is considered a pain receptor, but one that starts to signal to your brain things are getting too hot. Now, for some reason, turning on that receptor helps these patients feel better. That we're not sure why.
MJ BizCon is one of the biggest cannabis conventions in the world. I traveled here to meet with Alice Bennett. She's a publicist in the cannabis industry, and she has CHS. With this diagnosis, she's no longer able to consume cannabis, but still works amongst those who do on a daily basis.
So I know these conferences, a lot of what they do is they have these off-campus events, kind of like where we are now. But people here are smoking, so how does that affect
took my happiness. It took the mother that I used to be. My hope for the future with CHS is that we can get doctors to pay attention and to do the studies, because we don't know why certain people get it.
And what we know is the near daily users are growing in number. So there are just over 11 million now. Previously, there were 8 million a few years ago. That's Americans who consume at least 20 days or more per month of cannabis. A lot of researchers have claimed CHS is rare, but there's no initial study pointing out why they're saying that. We were the first to try to do a prevalence study to discover how many patients might have it. And what we found is approximately a third of regular users might have some level of CHS. Based on our study, it may be that around 3 million Americans have had some symptoms of CHS.
Could this happen to 2 days? Like, could this happen to
Well, the truth is, we're not sure.
It's nightmare, and people have died from this. It's really unfortunate, and I don't want there to be any more deaths.
We need to make it legal, so we make sure that Brian's lives get what is it like to CHS. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I get out of bed every day, because my son deserves to be born.
Okay. All right. So, like they were saying in the video, what happens is you stop using while you're in the hospital, and so you get better. And so they send you home, and they're like, oh, you're better. And then you get home, and you don't know what you have, so you start using marijuana again, and then you get violently sick again. You end up in the hospital. They give you fluids, or like they were giving me food through an IV, you get better. It's a vicious cycle until they figure out what you have. And for a lot of these users, especially teenagers who are not using it medicinally, they're never going to believe that it's marijuana doing this to them. And so they get home, they start using again, and their parents are telling them, this is marijuana, the doctors say it's marijuana doing this to you. And they're being told, marijuana is natural. Marijuana doesn't kill you. Marijuana can't kill you. And they're starting to use marijuana in the day of legalization of marijuana. So they think it's okay to use. And so they're never going to believe that this is caused by marijuana. And so just like this boy who died, he started using again. And for 6 months he was fine, because they don't know why or when it happens. And so for 6 months he was fine, and then all of a sudden it started again, and he ended up dying from it. So the last thing that I want to say is that I'm not against using marijuana because of this. The whole reason that I'm sharing this now is because I'm actually for the legalization of marijuana. And the reason for that is because I think that by legalizing it, especially federally, which I don't know if that will ever happen, but I think they will start funding the research necessary to find the answers needed to help people who are suffering from the unknown after effects of using these products. I think that if something is going to be made available to the public, that they should study it and test it and have the research behind it before they make it available to the public, so that they know the potential outcomes of it. Because I suffered for over a year in and out of the hospitals I can't even explain to you how many tests done. And doctors still don't know what it is. I go into the doctor's office today and I can't tell you how many specialists and how many doctors have no clue what I'm talking about when I tell them that I have CHS. And they have no idea what it is. And I think that's horrible. It's horrible because there are especially, I feel especially bad for the teenagers out there and the parents out there, because they're bringing their kids into the ER, and there are ER doctors who don't know what it is, and they can't treat them because they don't know what it is. And so I think that if it's legalized, that way they can make an informed decision themselves, and the parents can make informed decisions, and that no one else has to suffer wondering what's wrong with them, and no one else has to die, when it's something that can easily be prevented and easily be taken care of before it gets to that point. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening. I know this was an unusual topic, and most of you probably never thought we'd be discussing marijuana in Rotary. But this is a real issue that is becoming more relevant every day, especially for people with teenagers, people who work with teens, and for law enforcement, substance abuse people, and healthcare professionals. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes.
Yeah, what are you doing now for your fibromyalgia?
That is a great question. That was my biggest fear, actually. My biggest fear was what happens now when I have a flare, because I can get through the daily stuff with my regular fibromyalgia medication, but my biggest fear was what happens when I have a big flare. So I went to my pain clinic, and sadly, the pain clinic I was going to didn't believe me about the CHS. They don't know what it is, and they said, your options are continue on the marijuana or go without anything. So I left that pain clinic. I started with a new pain clinic, and they, unfortunately, the options weren't great. They started me on tramadol and Flexeril for if I have a flare. So knock on wood, I haven't had a flare yet, but we'll see how it goes when I have a flare. That's kind of our fear. I do know that I will not, after what I went through in the last year, I will not, as tempting as it would be to go back to the marijuana, I can't do it. I mean, I wish these are some pictures of my hospital stays, but I don't have the pictures of the worst of the worst, because you don't think about taking pictures at that time when you're in it. But I was down to skin and bones. It was bad. And I can't go through that again. It's not worth it. I mean, I was, like I said, my kidneys were shutting down. I was dying, basically. And I can't, nothing's worth that. So at this point, it's kind of back to square one with the flares. So it's a trial and error basis again, but not worth going through what I went through. But good question. That was our thing too. Yeah.
You had a list of trigger foods back in the presentation, and I was confused a little bit about what those were. Were those foods that contain cannabis?
So not cannabis, but cannabinoids. So some of those foods, quite a few of those foods actually contain cannabinoids. Not on the same level that cannabis contains cannabinoids, but some foods do have natural cannabinoids in them, which can trigger the same episodes as the cannabis does.
And so if you have CHS or not, those trigger foods can affect the way you react to that?
Correct. They can when you're in recovery from CHS, they can trigger an episode because the cannabinoid receptors in your brain think that they are the same thing. So they trigger you to have the same kind of episode.
So CHS only started through cannabis, or can it be started through chocolate?
No, only through, as far as we're aware so far, with what we know only through cannabis, yes. Good question though. I wasn't aware that foods contain cannabinoids until I started doing the research. So, were there some more questions? Yes.
They say that marijuana isn't addictive, and that's why it's so safe. But I mean, you look at the boy who died, and he was using it, and then he quit for 6 months, and he went back to it. And even you yourself said it'd be very, very tempting to. So do you know anything about that?
I can tell you from my own personal experience, if you would have asked me when I first started marijuana if it was addictive, I would have been very defensive and been like, no, it's not addictive. I completely disagree with that. When I quit 71 days ago, it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, because you become dependent on it, especially if you're using it for pain and you're using it on a daily basis. I don't see how it cannot be dependent. I disagree with that statement, and anyone who says it's not addictive is fooling themselves. And we do have a drug counselor in here, and it is diagnosable. So,
What is diagnosable? The addiction or?
the addiction of marijuana, yes. Andy?
Erin, do you think that the volume of use kicked off your CHS or a person's potential of getting CHS? I mean, if they're using 5 times a day, or if they're the social, once a week user, do you think that there's a correlation?
So far from what we're being told and from what the studies show so far, it is the frequency of use and the level of THC. So they're saying someone who uses, it has to be frequent, so not like a casual user. And the level of THC has something to do with it too. So yeah. However, there is misinformation out there too that it has to be someone that's been using it for a long time. And I'm a part of 2 support groups. The other thing I learned when I went and started researching, I also went on Facebook and looked it up, and there are probably 25 plus support groups on Facebook for CHS recoverers. So there are thousands, if not more, people who have this out there. So the fact that all this information out there says it's a rare condition is not accurate at all. It's not rare, it's a lot more common than people think. And there's information out there that says that you have to have been a long-term user, and I'm finding the more and more research I do, that's not true either. There's people who haven't been using it that long, they're just a frequent user, like a daily user, and they've only been using a short amount of time, and they've gotten it. So I think the frequency and the level of THC definitely have something to do with it, and the most recent studies that I've read are finding that it may have something to do with genetics as well. Any other questions? Yeah, Gary.
Well, I saw in there that you were at the Mayo Clinic. Did they not diagnose it?
That is a touchy point for me. Mayo Clinic is supposed to be one of the best hospitals in the country. And they actually have a study published online about it, but they did not even bring it up, not one time. And they did every test under the sun on me, and they never brought it up one time. So, no, they did not.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, that was fantastic. Thanks for sharing.